The first ever episode of Weird Warfare is going to start in a place where you probably would not imagine such a discussion or podcast centered around conflict would start. We're going to start with a young man, the first governor of Michigan, the state, Stevens T. Mason. He wasn't a governor originally per se. He was appointed the state's acting territorial secretary by the acting president at the time, Andrew Jackson, when he was only 19 years old, and he became the territorial governor from 1834 at the age of 22, and he remains the youngest state governor in American history. Now, why am I starting off a podcast dedicated to warfare in Michigan in the early 19th century? And with this random guy, who most of you, even most Michiganders or Ohioans, probably have never really heard of. Basically, this podcast will be dedicated to things like that, to weird wars and things like that, where you're like, did not understand, didn't even know it happened. So, he was always considered a feisty 22-year-old, according to the Michigan Department of Military and Veterans Affairs website, who led a 250-person group of volunteers into an area known as the Toledo Strip. So to give you some background, they were going to go fight troops of the state of Ohio over this piece of land that enclosed Toledo. Some background is the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 established an east-west line drawn from the southern tip of Lake Michigan across the base of the peninsula, right? This line was drawn using maps that showed the line intersecting Lake Erie north of the Maumee River. This is the line of scrimmage that Ohioans recognized when their Constitution was drafted. When the Michigan Territory was created in 1805, a territory, not state, 1805 Michigan is still a territory, surveyors would realize that the bottom tip of Lake Michigan was actually further south, and when they redrew the lines, they included the area that would later become Toledo. So technically, Toledo should be in Michigan. That's why you look at a little map of Michigan and Ohio. You start from the bottom tip of Lake Michigan, and it goes straight east for a while, then kind of hops north for a little bit, and then keeps going east. It's very slight, but it's there. You can notice it, and it goes right around Toledo. So what you had was what in football you'd call the other person offsides. At first, the surveyors said the Ohioans were right. Now, when Michigan became a territory and the surveyors came back and looked at the lines, they're like, we messed up. This is what it actually is. Ohio, obviously not happy about that since they're losing a chunk of land to what is a territory. Ohio is a state. Michigan is a territory at this point. In 1817, the U.S. Surveyor General, who was a former Ohio governor, sent William Harris out to survey the line according to Ohio's Constitution. So then Michigan's territorial governor at the time, Lewis Cass, went to then President James Monroe to protest the call. Now, what happened was that Michigan wanted their own surveyors. And the two surveys showed two different lines with 8 miles apart at Lake Erie and 5 miles apart at the Indiana border, with 468 square miles in between. Ohio still claimed the Toledo Strip as its own. And the squabbling and the fighting about it stopped. And Michigan sort of moved in and assumed not quite control, but a sort of jurisdiction and presence in the area. So what you have is Michigan volunteers and what you could call Minutemen sort of moving into this to a state. Michigan isn't even a territory yet, so having people move in from a territory that's not a state, it's not recognized statehood, into your state, which is recognized. Trust me, the Ohioans were not happy. It heated up again when Michigan sought admission into the Union on December 11th, 1833. Despite Michigan's presence in the land it took jurisdiction over, Toledo, Ohio congressmen lobbied to deny Michigan's acceptance as a state until it agreed to Ohio's version of the boundary, which is wrong. Ohio's version is wrong. Massachusetts Representative John Quincy Adams, who was a former president, supported Michigan, saying, quote, "Never in the course of my life have I known controversy of which all the right so clearly on one side, and all the power so overwhelmingly on the other." End quote. Adams was referring, of course, to Michigan not being a state and a territory, and Ohio being a state, which immediately gives it more rights and more leeway with the federal government than just a territory. Ohio's governor at the time, Robert Lucas, refused to negotiate over the issue with Michigan. What happened is that in a blatant act of defiance, Lucas turned the disrupted region into a county of Ohio and named it after himself. He named it Lucas County. This is where Stevens T. Mason comes in, the man we talked about, or the young man, 22 years old at the time, mobilizes troops and heads towards Ohio. And this would be a state conflict 20 years before the Civil War. It was more loud noises and threats, really, than an actual war. It was more, look, we have guns, so do we. We've got bayonets, they're shiny, so do we. Look at our uniforms, look at our uniforms. After Ohio voted to approve a 300,000 military budget, it's a lot of money back then. Michigan upped the ante and approved one with 315,000. Yeah, I know. There's some rivalry money-wise going into the GDP production of these states. Militarily-wise, the militia of Michigan ended up arresting Ohio officials, captured surveyors, and fired warning shots over the heads of others as they retreated from the area. Ironically, Ohio is the only one that actually hit anything. A Ohioan, his name, I love this, Two Stickney is his name, stabbed in a bar fight a Michigan sheriff. That was the only casualty. Andrew Jackson eventually stepped in and the war ended. He took Mason out of office, and the militia commander of Ohio disbanded his troops. Congress still held Michigan statehood basically hostage until it agreed with Ohio's wrong claims. Michigan was right. Was it right to move into the Toledo Strip? I don't know. As a Michigander, I think, yeah, I do. There's a reason we distrust anything with the name Ohio in it. And it's because of this, damn it. The people of Michigan still set up a state government. And Stevens T. Mason, the man who led those troops and the man we talked about, the very young man at the beginning of this episode, was elected the first governor. In 1837, January to be exact, Michigan became the 26th state of the Union. Its territory did not include the Toledo Strip. It had the western three-quarters of the Upper Peninsula as compensation, which includes the Upper Peninsula, so you Yoopers up there, 9,000 square miles, which became more economically prosperous and good for Michigan. It had timber, iron, and if you ever go up there, there are loads of copper mines you can stumble across if you're wandering around or hiking in the wilderness. You will find all that stuff, and it's very lucrative. There's a reason Michigan became a big producer of things. It had lots of resources. There were furs, there was lumber for houses, and Grand Rapids specifically, one of the big cities in Michigan these days. would become furniture city. Steel case furniture would be founded there. There's a famous incident of the Grand River that runs through Michigan, where it was clogged with logs, with loggers just floating down as many trunks and timbers as they could. And obviously Detroit became a major metal working, I should sort of say, and automobile and very industrial, metal-oriented, as well as lumber, city, and an icon of Michigan. So this battle it really wasn't a battle. It was barely even a war. It was mostly just you having an argument with your neighbor about a property line and a sheriff getting stabbed over it. Some people have compared it to the 2016 Buckeye versus Wolverine football game with poor officiating, meaning Michigan lost. I'm not going to wade into that whole thing. So they did not gain the Toledo Strip. And to be completely honest, I think Michigan won. Sure, we took the one casualty, no one died, but we gained the Upper Peninsula. And we had then the youngest governor at 22 years governing us as the 26th state of the Union. So that's just the small story of what I think is a fascinating, I don't even know what to call it, a conflict? I don't know. It's a neighborly spat between northern state of Michigan and the southern state of Ohio, which has created one of the biggest state v. state rivalries, in the entire, not just Midwest, but the Union. So, in a way, it's created one of the best football rivalries, generally between two very good teams in the NCAA and on the national level, because someone decided to stab a Michigan official in a bar fight, and there was a disagreement over where the line of the southern tip of Michigan went to. Obviously now, it's kind of it's interesting because as a Michigander, I look at that little line where it jumps up north, little ways through Michigan, through east, and then it hops up north and then goes east again around the Toledo area, which was very desirable at the time, mostly just not just pride, but there were some resources. There was some timber and furs, and there was a reason that area, Detroit, Toledo, was settled early on by French fur traders, is because of the lumber and the fur. And in the 1800s, the early 1800s, that was still a very big source of income. It was dying off, but it was still there. So as a Michigander, obviously I'm biased, we won. Someone from Ohio would say Ohio won because they were the only ones that actually inflicted a casualty. It's obvious who won the war. Michigan did, in my eyes. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It was very fun reading about. I will leave a link in the description to the article on the Toledo War left by the Michigan Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, as well as the Wikipedia article to Stevens T. Mason. It's a very interesting read. I know most of you don't like Wikipedia, but it's good for snapshots. And then you can go and check all the sources down at the bottom, which is always great. So I hope you'd enjoyed, and stick by for any new episodes of Weird Warfare. My name is Harry, and I am signing off.